Hello, everyone. As autumn begins, we want to welcome you to Surge's September webinar, You Are Sent, Finding Your Place in God's Global Mission. My name is Anna Madsen, and I'm one of the program leaders here on Surge's renewal team. And I'm so delighted that you've joined us today. Just a bit of background in case you're new to Surge. We're a cross-denominational international mission sending agency, and we're committed to keeping the gospel of grace central to all that we do. We know that we never outgrow our own need for grace, even as we take the good news of that grace to the nations. And we believe that the power of God for mission is uniquely expressed through weak people who know that they need Jesus every minute of every day. And for us, these webinars are one way that we as a mission seek to nurture a culture of grace in Christian communities in North America and all around the world. Just a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. After the presentation today, we'll be able to take some of your questions. So at any point in the hour, feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function in your Zoom toolbar. And we'll just take as many as we can until our time together is up. You may also see the Zoom functions for chat and raise hand, but we will not be using those functions today. We're only using the Q&A function. And finally, it might put some of your minds to rest to know that while you can see the speakers on your screen, neither we at Surge nor other attendees can see you. All right, with housekeeping done, let me introduce you to today's presenter, Nathan Sloan. Nathan is the Executive Director of Upstream Sending, a missions organization focused on putting the local church in the driver's seat of sending. Before his current role, he led global missions at Sojourn Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was a missionary in Nepal. He is author of Multi-Site Missions Leadership and his recently released title, You Are Sent, with the same name as today's webinar. He holds a doctorate of missiology from Southern Seminary, and Nathan and his wife, Sarah, live in Louisville with their two wonderful children, Asia, who's 8, and Jeremy, who's 6. Nathan, welcome. What a gift to have you with us today. And I'll just turn things over to you, and we're really looking forward to what you'll be sharing today.
Thank you. It's a joy to be with you. I have such affection for Surge, both in the renewal ministry. My wife and I have done sonship, and I have a lot of really good friends there. So when you guys asked me to come on, I was glad to do it. Well, I'm going to share my screen. And what Surge has asked me to do is really just talk about the book that I wrote. I've wrote over the last few years and kind of give the background to it. And then I'm just going to dive into one of the topics that I feel like kind of sets the stage for it. So I want to start with just what is You Are Sent. So basically for the last 11, 12 years before I started Upstream Sending, I was a missions pastor of a local church. And I would say we were a sending church. And what I mean by a sending church is we were intentionally seeking to raise up and send out our people across the world, across the nation, and across the street, just helping them understand that they have the gospel with them as believers wherever they go. So developing that culture, one of the things we did is we were seeking to train our people using all kinds of resources, books, tools, all kinds of stuff. A lot of that we developed in-house, but because there wasn't a lot of really good things out there that fit our context. Now hear me, there's a lot of good mission resources, but I really wanted something that was geared toward the local church that we could apply and really shape based on our theology, our culture, and our values. And I happened to be in a meeting with some other mission pastors, and someone else kind of said the same thing. I was like, I kind of feel the same way. We're doing this stuff, but we're kind of piecemealing it. And the conclusion was someone should write a discipleship course that churches could use. So that just kind of stuck with me. So over the next 2 years, I took on the task of interviewing other mission pastors. I interviewed about 15 other mission pastors of churches who would self-identify as sending churches, and asking them what would they want in a course. And here's some of the things that we talked about. So that You Are Sent, the book itself, the thesis is, it was written to give people a deeper understanding and passion for global missions, while at the same time equipping you to make disciples wherever you find yourself. So I think one of the things that churches really want is, at least the churches I'm involved in, is to break some of that dichotomy between local and global. There needs to be distinction. It's helpful. Crossing cultures and languages, yes, we need to understand that. But sometimes we can raise one above the other, right? We pit them against each other. And our people, members of our churches, can get confused. I was talking with a leader yesterday. He's a church planter. And he was saying, I used my lack of call, I put that in air quotations, as an excuse not to really obey what God had called me to do. So we do have unique calls, but I wanted to give churches this understanding that living sent, taking out the gospel, applies to all of us. And some of us uniquely are called to go on global mission. But some of the things that we talked about, the churches are wanting, they want a global missions discipleship course written by a local church for local churches. A course adaptable and flexible to different people's church contexts. We do it in a classroom setting. A lot of churches I know who are using it now do it in a small group setting, like a Bible study, or in one-on-one discipleship. Churches wanted something that was robust, yet accessible for every member. Some of the things out there are very academic, and the other things are really simplistic, but something that was deep, but could be approachable. And of course, created to do in community with others. You Are Sent is actually written as a small group study. Again, you can do in a classroom or you can do in one-on-one discipleship, but it would actually be very confusing to try to sit down and to do by yourself. And that's intentional, that these ideas of living out your sentness, to living out the gospel in your community and beyond, is best done exploring that call, that understanding along with other believers. And I really wanted the course to drive people to action, yet root that action, that movement, in their abiding life with Jesus. So it gives you an understanding of what You Are Sent is and how it's intended to be used. It's intended for churches, for leaders to take it and to train their people to love God's heart for the nations and to apply it really in whatever context they find themselves in. Here's a table of contents just to kind of give you an overview. I take people through an understanding of God's heart for the nations in the Old Testament and the New Testament. We're asking questions. We're having group discussions throughout. There's memory verses. There's assignments you can do. Go to an international restaurant. Engage in different languages. There's different helpful things. We talk about a necessity of missions. It's kind of a theology of missions. History of the church. What does it mean that the church is on mission? This abiding, discipleship, evangelism, living sent, which is the topic we're gonna dive into today. Understanding culture, just kind of give a flyover of what's the concept of culture, what are some basic principles, and then applying it in some case studies. The state of the world, how is God on the move, working in ways seen and unseen? And then what's the task that remains? And then lastly, helping people understand their place in helping expand God's global kingdom. So that's the book. So that's what I want to talk about today, is this concept of you were created to live sent. Now, I realize this can be kind of strange language, depending on what tribe you're in or what books you read. People use all kinds of things. I could say, hey, you were created to live on mission. You were created to take the gospel wherever you go. And it really is this basic idea that our mission, it's more than mere activity. It's more than going out and sharing the gospel, although it's that. It's more than going on a short-term trip, although it can be that. It's more than packing up your family and planting roots in a new city and sharing the gospel, although it is that. But it's more than activity. It's our very identity. You see, the triune God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, sent Jesus into the world to bring redemption, to bring hope, to restore us back into relationship with God. And then Jesus and the Father together send the Spirit into the world to bring conviction of sin, to empower the church, to lead us, to guide us. And then the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, the triune God, send the church out on the world to be about his mission. So our very nature, as we have followed Christ, as we abide in him, we are carrying out that sentness that didn't start with us, that really started with God himself. God is a missionary God, and he is sending and has been sending. He sent his son, he sent his spirit, and we're continuing that movement. So living on mission, yes, is an activity. You have to like open your mouth and declare. You have to reach out and show love, both word and deed, but it's more than activity. It's also rooted in our identity. And I believe, and I talk about this in the book, I don't think we can truly experience the Christian life the way it's intended to be experienced until we live on mission for Jesus, until we share Jesus with others. So this, I get this from John 20, verse 19 through 21. I'd really encourage you to read that in context. This is when Jesus is resurrected. His disciples are hiding in a locked room. They are afraid. They're confused. And Jesus appears before them. He doesn't need to open the door. He can walk straight through the door. He appears before them. He shows his hands and his side, that he is the resurrected Jesus. And he declares to them, first of all, peace. He invites them to experience peace in him. But then he also says, as the Father has sent me into the world, as the Father sent me, so I am sending you. This is one of those 5 Great Commission passages, but it's distinct, and then it's rooting our mission activity and our mission identity. We are sent as Jesus himself was sent into the world. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, right? He was incarnate, which means he like came into a place and took on flesh. He took on culture. He took on language. Same thing a missionary is supposed to do. He's willing to move to the margins to be with those who are broken and hurting. There's a lot of beautiful pictures that we could take from Jesus's incarnational ministry. But the thing I want us to focus on is this living sent, that when we follow Jesus, we are stepping into a mission that he began and we are continuing. And we find that identity in John 20, 19 through 21. So living sent means that simply doing missions is a limited perspective. I think what can happen is if we think of doing missions, and I put that in italics, we are led to things like guilt. One of the things I do on the side is I teach a personal evangelism class for a local college. And I kind of come out of the gate, hey, there's 1 or 2 people here. There are people here who are excited about this class and they are so ready to share their faith. And there are others like me who are a little afraid and it's not so easy. And maybe you are driven by guilt and your motivation is off a little bit. So that's why it's a limited perspective. If it's just duty, if it's just activity, we're missing the full picture of what it means to live on mission. Instead, we are called to be missional, like living out who we are. That means to have the gospel woven into our everyday languages, our actions, instead of like trying to find the exact right moment to declare Jesus and to show Jesus. It just is woven throughout all of our life. We talk about Jesus because we love Jesus. This became really real to me when we had our daughter. Her name is Asia. She was this tiny little baby. She's like under 6 pounds. Remember the first time I held her, my heart was just like literally overflowed with joy. And that just kind of continued. And a few months later, I had to go on a trip to visit some of our missionaries with one of our pastors. And we were on a train and we were on a plane. We were hanging out with people. And one of kind of the rules of our house is when I travel, my wife sends me a picture or a video of our kids. So I would get a picture every day. And I'm always like going to Pastor Mike, look, here's my daughter, Asia. Look how cute she is. And Mike had like 4 or 5 kids at the time. And later on, he was like, hey, I just want you to know that trip is really annoying to me because you talked about your daughter all the time. And it made me feel bad as a dad. Dad guilt, right? And at one point, it just clicked with me, like the love I experienced for my daughter was so big. I literally couldn't contain it. It just like poured out. So I'd meet a stranger and be like, look at my cute little daughter. And that's how we're supposed to be with Jesus. We're so filled with love as we abide, as we renew, that it just flows out of our lives. So to make evangelism and disciple making some sort of like activity only thing, this event that we step into, we're stunting what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an everyday part of our life. So we call this missional living. Missional living means that we take on the posture and practices of a missionary in the everyday rhythms of life. It means that It's an ordinary part of our language and our actions. So just like I said, it's just kind of flows through everything we do. We don't have to find awkward moments to talk about Jesus, because we are just talking about Jesus as it's a normal part of our life, because it is. Following Jesus is our life, and we can talk about it without it being weird or strange. And as people see us walk with him and talk about him, as they experience the ebbs and flows of life, they are able to ask us and join us in our walk with Jesus. Thomas Hale was a missionary in Nepal. That's where I served. So he's kind of a hero to me. He's written several books, but a book he wrote that we use to help train missionaries is called On Being a Missionary. It's kind of his autobiography from his call all the way to his retirement. It's a fascinating book. But in it, and he's talking about living on mission, he says, no one can say, since I'm not called to be a missionary, I do not have to evangelize my friends and neighbors. There is no difference in spiritual terms between the missionary witnessing in his hometown and a missionary witnessing in Kathmandu, Nepal. We are all called to go, even if it's only to the next room or the next block. We are called to be Christ's witnesses by word and deed. So Thomas is hitting the nail on the head here. He understands what it means to be a cross-cultural missionary. He left a medical practice in order to root his life out where people didn't have Jesus or medical care. He learned language and culture, but he's speaking back into the American church, and he's saying, hey, when you elevate global missions to the point where it stunts your responsibility to share Jesus and make disciples, you're missing the boat. That we have this same identity we're living out, even if it's across the block. And for many of us, it's across the room, right? It's a parent, an unbelieving parent. It's a little brother. It's an aunt or an uncle, or maybe across to another cubicle. So this living sent goes with us wherever we go. I often say, wherever you wake up and plant your feet is where you're called to live on mission. Now, the Lord may be leading you beyond where you plant your feet, but today you're called to live on mission where you find yourself. So I want to address this thing that can be a tension point, and I understand, but yes, geography does matter. I want us to consider the country of Turkey. I have friends who live and work in Turkey, and Turkey has about 84 million people in it. It's a large country. And we're guessing that there are less than 8,000 evangelical Christians. And by evangelical, I'm defining it as someone who is born again, who has a personal relationship with Jesus, who believes the Bible, and believes the responsibility of sharing that gospel with others. So there are about 8,000 evangelical Christians. So in the country of Turkey, we're estimating that there's less than a 100% of the people would be Christians. So it's staggering, right? And Turkey acts for us in this webinar as a picture of the world. There are places and cities and people groups and whole regions that have less access. Some places in the world have little to no access to the gospel. If they wanted to go to a church and they walked outside their door to find one, they couldn't. Or if they wanted to meet a Christian, there aren't Christians in their circles. There would be no one to talk to. Or if they wanted to pick up the Bible in their language, for some people, there's no Bible to read. So this gospel poverty is a very real thing. And we need more and more people to move across languages, across cultures, to bring the gospel to people who have less access. So geography does matter when we talk about living sent, to living out the gospel and making disciples. However, that does not negate our responsibility. We have we're called to personally obey the Great Commission, all of us. So let me ask you 3 questions. And these obviously rhetorical because you aren't allowed to talk in this webinar. But I do want you to think about it in an application way. Where has God placed you? So think about that. For me, I'm placed in Louisville, Kentucky, in Shelby Park. I live in a small, impoverished community. Many of my neighbors are not believers. And when I woke up and I got out of bed, when I planted my feet on the ground, it was in Shelby Park. So that I am called to make Jesus known in that place. Where is he leading you? So that's where you are today, whatever maybe you said out loud or said to yourself, where he has placed you. And maybe he is leading you to plant roots and to be faithful in that community till the day you die. Or maybe this is a stopover to another place. Or maybe he is working in you. Maybe when you hear things about Turkey or less places that have less access, or people groups that have no Bible, your heart just is set afire. And you're like, I think the Lord would have me to do that. So I think it's an important question. Where is he leading you? And the third question I would ask, how can you be faithful today? Today. A lot of what I've done in my ministry is helping people explore their call, determine opportunities, and to move themselves cross-culturally to make disciples, plant churches. And sadly, more times than I would have thought, when I'm asking questions about how are you making Jesus known in your everyday life, how you're investing in new believers, how are you serving those around you, a lot of people just don't have good answers. Be it the American life is very, very busy, be it they have young kids or they're in school, whatever it may be, their life is full to the brim and there's no margin or no space to live sent where they are. So maybe the challenge for you is to wrestle with that question. How can you be faithful today? Because the people he wants to send cross-culturally are the ones who are being faithful today, or moving toward faithfulness. Let's say that. So I think it's a question we all need to wrestle with. When we look around in this moment, what are the opportunities that lay before us to live missionally, to live on mission for Jesus? So how can you be on mission in your life? So let's just think about some different situations. Maybe you're a college student and your life is wake up, take a shower. You may wake up late. Maybe some days you don't take a shower. You rush off to class. You rub shoulders with all kinds of people. Maybe you have a job to help pay for college. But God's placed you in a situation where you're probably around a lot of unbelievers. Now you may say, I've got exams and classes and sports, like I get all that. But in your everyday life, there are opportunities to both display and declare Jesus in clear ways. Again, don't just think about, okay, I'm finding the right way and right opportunity to insert the gospel. Bam, let's get them. How in all of your life can you live out your faith so that when you do declare Jesus clearly, it's like, well, of course he's going to tell us about Jesus. He's a Christian and lives out the gospel in his everyday life. I think about this. I was a college athlete and I was always rubbing shoulders with both believers and unbelievers. We were traveling to tournaments. I was meeting all kinds of people and I had opportunities to both display and declare Jesus because I was a college athlete or a college student, or I worked at a hotel being a security guard. I had all kinds of opportunities to just live out my faith. Another is a stay-at-home mom. So when my wife and I came back from the field and we started having kids, her life got very full, very fast, and there's very little margin. So I remember us talking about, and she just asked the question, how can my everyday busy life intersect with gospel opportunities? So for her, there was a story time at our local library. So she started taking our little toddler to this story time. And before and after the story, she would just talk to ladies. She met a couple different unbelievers. One was from Europe, and another one was in a marriage that was falling apart. And she just, every time they met, she'd just ask new questions. You know, how's it going? Anything new? How can I pray for you? And just be present, grabbing coffee afterward. One of the couples started coming to our church. They started hearing the gospel. They joined our small group. It was beautiful to watch my wife live out her faith in these tiny little margins that she had in her life, but she made intentional choices to move toward unbelievers and to share life with them and just the normal rhythms of life. Or an office worker. You might, of course, this may change a lot because of COVID. Maybe you stay at home now, so your coworkers or your toddler and your spouse or your roommate. But for a lot of people, they work in an office. Maybe they're in a cubicle. Maybe they, when they go to the break room, they meet people, and you're naturally building relationships. Again, if you are littering your language and your life and your stories with Jesus and your Christian walk, you're going to have opportunities to share Jesus, be it starting a Bible study, or often the best opportunities to share the gospel are when people experience suffering and pain, the loss of a child, the loss of a parent, some sort of thing. And if you have been found as a person who loves well and who listens well, you're going to be able to step in those moments and bring the love of Jesus to others. So maybe one of these short case studies describes you, or maybe it's something else. Maybe you have another kind of descriptor of your life. What would it look like to live on mission in your everyday life? How can you be on mission in the everyday rhythms of your life? Now, hear me. I'm not saying, how can you create some huge ministry to like share Jesus and make disciples? I'm saying the way you live today, how can that intersect with unbelievers and maybe new believers to be able to disciple? So maybe you love to run on a treadmill and you have a treadmill in your basement. Well, why not go to a gym and start building friends? Or have a friend who lives overseas. He joined a running club, doesn't know anybody. He just got online. There's a running club that meets in the park and they go run around town and come back. And he does that every Wednesday night and has made a lot of friends who aren't Christians. And he can, as they're running, assuming they're not running too fast, they can have conversations and do life together. How does your life intersect with others? So that's what I want to do. I want to just take a moment for you to think about an application point. I want you to think about one area in your normal life where you can be more intentional with making Jesus known. Now, I don't know about you, but I often come up with like a 5-part series of a grand plan to like transform my life. That's not what I'm asking. I want you to just think about the everyday normal rhythms of your life and how can you be more intentional with making Jesus known? And it needs to move toward gospel proclamation, but it can also just be gospel demonstration that will open doors to deeper relationship. For example, I live in a community where our houses are packed in. You know, our houses are about 25 feet wide and they're all like stacked on top of each other. Well, when I mow my front yard, it takes like 5 minutes because it's a tiny front yard. It takes me 15 minutes to mow both my neighbor's yard. So I could just mow my neighbor's yard, right? Well, that is not gospel declaration, but what it does is it shows to my neighbors that I am thoughtful and caring and I would help them. Or one of my neighbors is a single mom and we've lived beside her for the last 10 years. And there've been multiple opportunities that we can step into her life and demonstrate the love of Jesus. And as we're demonstrating, we get opportunities to declare the love of Jesus. But that's just a normal rhythm of life, right? I go home, I come out, my kids are playing, her kids are playing. We didn't have to create some big elaborate ministry to live life and show her who Jesus was. What could that be for you? Something to think about. Maybe before you go to bed tonight, I would encourage you to talk to a roommate, talk to a friend, talk to someone about what that could look like for you. Even write it down. Take time to journal that, make a commitment to yourself. So this life on mission that we're called to leave, again, it's more than an activity. It's our identity. So what do we do with our identity? We live it out in every part of our life. We're littering our language and our actions and our relationships with Jesus and what it means to be a believer. And living on mission is a beautiful thing, but we experience spiritual warfare. It can be difficult. And one of the things that I have found really helpful as my experience with Surge is this concept of renewing mission. Renewing mission is this, we are experiencing renewal in Jesus, that renewal in Jesus and mission with Jesus feed each other. You notice the difference? We're being renewed as we abide, as we are found in him. And then we actually serve with him. Hear me out. We're not serving for Jesus on mission. We are serving with him. And those two things will feed each other. As we're giving our life away, Jesus is filling up and overflowing our lives. One of my favorite illustrations is a cup of cold water. And I encourage our missionaries, like, what if you live life instead of like this, pouring yourself out for others? What if you poured your life up with Jesus, or he fills you up and the overflow of that life is pouring out to those around you? So you're experiencing tremendous joy and others are also experiencing that joy. This is cyclical, meaning we abide and find renewal. As we abide and find renewal, we are drawn out into mission. As you gaze at Jesus, as you abide in him, he's driving you out. He's pushing you out. Just like the love for my daughter, Asia, drove me out to tell others about her. That is true. And as we serve others on mission, as we're serving in mission, we are driven back to renewal in Jesus. This cyclical pattern happens. And you saw Anna showed that chart at the beginning. I'm going to show it here in a second. This pattern of renewal and mission. It's constantly happening in the life of the believer. But it's also interwoven. We were talking about this yesterday on our call, is that our need for Jesus and our renewal in him are interwoven into our life on mission to others. It's both cyclical, it is always happening, but it's interwoven in these moments. We can experience both at the same time. As I'm moving out into a difficult situation with others and loving them well, I'm experiencing the love of Jesus in my own life. It's happening simultaneously. That's what it means to be found in Jesus, to belong to him. And what does this mean? One of the applications for me is when I live on mission, I'm living a life of dependence. And if you're on this call and you're a cross-cultural missionary, you know what you mean. You know what I mean. If you live cross-cultural mission, you are constantly dependent on Jesus and on other people. And that posture of dependence is driving you back to renewal in Jesus, or your own brokenness. You're experiencing the brokenness of life, or your own weakness, your limited ability in life. All of these three things are opportunities to abide, to be renewed, and to continue to be on mission. One of the favorite things I learned it from Serge, and I've learned it from some of my mentors. The best leaders lead with a limp. They lead with their weak foot forward. I love what Paul says in 2 Corinthians, this concept that when we're weak, then he is strong. He is strong through us. He loves to use broken and limited people to display his glory. So this is the chart we were talking about earlier, this experiencing renewal as we live on mission, and we're driven out to mission as we're experiencing renewal in him. And I'm constantly trying to remind myself of this truth, that God desires to see his love planted and grow in the world and in our lives. God's plan for his kingdom is not to use up his children as disposable tools. So if you're a pastor or you're a missionary, or you're just a Christian who loves Jesus and you feel run over and abandoned and unseen, I want to remind you that the gospel is both for those around you and it's for you. The gospel is planted in your life and it is growing, and we can take time to abide and be renewed. Jesus cares deeply about both the world and you as a person. So I want to give you as I wrap up, I want to give you some practical ways that you can live on mission, that you can live out your sentness. Number one, share meals with non-Christians. For most of us, we eat 3 meals a day. Some of us eat 4 meals a day. Sometimes I eat 4 meals a day. So you have to eat anyway. Why not invite people to join you for those meals? There's nothing in this world that breaks down barriers like food and drink. One of my favorite books in this area is by Tim Chester, Meals with Jesus. And Jesus had this beautiful ministry where he went into homes, Pharisee, tax collector, everybody in between, and he shared meals with them. And people's walls come down and they become more vulnerable. So you just open your table, share what you have. It doesn't have to be fancy. Share what you have, and you will have opportunities to live on mission. Be a regular, learn names and build relationships. Go to the same places, go to the same coffee shops, go to the same grocery stores, stand in line. I often do use the automated scanners, but if there's an opportunity to go to the same person and learn someone's name, do things like that. Learn the names of your neighborhood, those in your neighborhood. Take walks, prayer walks around your neighborhood, walk your dog. When you see someone on the porch, stop, ask their name, remember it, ask part of their story. Next time you go on a walk, you have an opportunity to, hey, Bill, how are you doing? How is your grandkids doing? And that will leave a mark with them. And you're building trust in your neighborhood. Build those relationships, genuine relationships. Number 3, get to know your neighbors and your coworkers and share life with them. When people are celebrating or they're mourning, step into those moments and show that you genuinely care, share life as much as possible. Again, my wife does this well. We live next to a park. We go to the park every evening so our kids can play. Our kids have made friends with kids in the neighborhood that we didn't know apart from that. Tomorrow we're having a birthday party for my son, and guess what? The neighborhood kids and their families are coming. So we get to invite them into our home and do life with them, at least as it relates to our children. Number 4, join in what's going on around you. I just want to push back a little bit and some things that can happen in the church. Sometimes we want to create these Christian enclaves of gyms and kids sports teams and whatever it might be within our churches and within our Christian spaces. But if we want to live missionally, let's move out to the world and join what they're doing. Join a local gym, or join, like I said, a running club, or join a knitting group or a book club, whatever it might be for you. Like, join in what the world is doing. Build relationships through hobbies and activities and interests. And then number 5, litter your language with Jesus and the gospel. Make talking about him just a normative thing. Again, talking about Jesus doesn't have to be normal. You know, a simple question is, hey, what did you do this weekend? Well, tell someone what you did. Like, I went to church, we had small group, we did X, Y, and Z. And as you litter your language and you make it normative, people are going to know that's you. And then when you also show up with your presence, even though maybe you're a little weird because you love Jesus and people don't know what to do with that, when you show them that you love them, they will trust you and move toward you. So the big takeaway on this book, You Are Sent, is I wanted people to see that God loves the nations, that he loves every language, tribe, people, and nation on the earth, and that he's given all of us a responsibility to make Jesus known, both here and there. And I believe that as we live out the gospel here, he will call more of us there. And our churches and our families and us as individuals will continue to make an impact for Jesus. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome, Nathan. Thank you so much. I love that idea of not thinking about mission as activity, but identity. That is super challenging and helpful to think about it in that way. So we'll transition now to our Q&A time. Just a reminder for those of you who are with us live today that you can submit your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom there on your Zoom toolbar. And we have about 12 minutes or so we'll take as many as we can until our time is up today. We do have a few questions. One person says, can you comment on programs like Perspectives and Kairos?
Sure. I think Perspectives is great. I teach Perspectives. I know Kairos is kind of a smaller version of that. So I think that's really, really good, and it works for a lot of churches, but doesn't work for every church. Or this might be more accessible to, say, a small group. I'll say that the other thing I wanted to do with this resource, with Perspectives, you're bringing in teachers, kind of experts in the field. The back of this, I've actually provided my manuscripts, so word for word what I would teach. So the idea is it could be flexible, meaning you could do it in your church, and if you feel like you don't have the needed experience, I put a lot of the content in the back. Or if you're like, I would actually like to teach this in a different way, go for it. I don't care. Like, you teach your experience, adapt it to your church. So it's just different, there's, not just with Perspectives and Kairos, there are other really good resources out there. There's one called Momentum. Yes. There's one called Explore. So there's some good stuff.
That's great. Yeah, another question about books and resources to help launch people into missions. Are there any other books that you think are helpful for kind of expanding this perspective?
Yeah, I saw that question. That is a very loaded question. There are a lot of really good things. I think the number one thing to cultivate the heart for global missions would be missionary biographies. So I'd really encourage that. A little one that is a really good read is Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. I would encourage that. Elizabeth Elliot wrote one called A Call to Die. It's really good. It's about Amy Carmichael. And then the third one I would recommend, it's a big one, but it's actually my favorite one. It's called On the Golden Shore by Adoniram Judson. So those would be three really good ones. There is a series called Encountering Mission. So they like produce different volumes, and they're pretty heady, but there's one called Introduction to Missiology, Introduction to Mission. And we often use it as kind of the primer. So it goes from biblical basis to mission, to calling, to missions history. So that's kind of a good one volume to take people through.
Yeah, and that reminds me that one of the ways I like to read those missionary biographies is they're really good for like listening to, like if you have audio books. Sometimes I'll be walking and listening to that, and it'll make me walk around the block some more because I'm so into those stories. So that's a great idea.
Actually,
okay.
I was just going to say, John Piper on Desiring God's website, he back in the day when he was a pastor of the church, he would do a biographical sermon, and there are quite a few sermons, like very well researched, very powerful, on all kinds of missionaries and people from church history. So we often use those because they're free, and they're it's basically you're getting the whole biography in like an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about any suggestions for retirees with sort of some physical limitations in terms of what you've been talking about for opportunities?
Referring just like in their everyday life or overseas?
Yeah, I think that's what they mean. Okay. Just kind of how to live on mission while, maybe, you're not quite physically as top shape as you once were.
Sure. I mean, I would imagine it depends on the situation and the limitations. But at least my friends who are retired, most of them have some sort of relational circles. Like I said, be it they do some sort of activity or they're part of some sort of club. So I learned this with my missionary friends who live in France. They have associations, and that life kind of runs through associations. And a lot of our missionary friends would just join associations, archery club, book club, whatever it might be. And that's really an inroads into developing friendships. So I think that would be maybe my number one pointer is like, what do you enjoy in retirement? And how can you do that thing that you enjoy with other people, specifically with non-Christians, and then inviting them into your life? I will say, to answer the question that they did not ask was, what does that mean for global missions? And there is a boom, kind of a new trend in global missions of retirees going overseas. They take a couple years and they go serve an existing team. I was just with the team in North Africa, and the guy had a business, sold the business, retired in their, I think, late 60s or 70s. And he's starting a business as mission or business as transformation in North Africa. He's like using all his skills, all his experience to set up a very viable business. And all these other people are coming in and they are a part of it, but he's able to lend his experience, and then they'll go back overseas, they'll go back stateside, spend time with grandkids, and they've used their giftings to really move forward the mission.
That's so great. I love, just kind of thinking that God even, maybe sort of inspired the things we enjoy as a way to push us out and get to know people. So that's a great idea. Question about, how do we engage in our churches? Maybe we're not on staff of the church, but we want to be a part of that church, moving from a church that just does missions to a church that is missional or even mission sending?
I mean, it's a great question. How do you lead when you're not in a leading chair? You lead up. I think I've seen a lot of churches grow in this in kind of a grassroots effort. So I will say, if you're one person who cares about missions and nobody else does, number one, that's probably not true. There are probably other people, but if that is the case, it will be really, really hard. But I think if you can lock shoulders with other people who really love missions and do something like that, yeah, use this book as a book study together, or read missionary biographies together, or do service projects. And then speak into the ear of leadership. As a pastor, this has often happened to me. It's like we have a group in our church that really cares about something. For example, we had a group that really cared about adoption and foster care. I mean, there's a lot going on in the church, but I'm like, okay, well, you keep doing your thing and check back in with me. And more people got involved. And before long, it's a ministry and it's a culture and a part of our church. But it's those faithful people who kept prodding and building and pulling others in. But too often what we want is like, man, I wish the pastor would talk about it more from the stage, or I wish we gave more to the budget. And all those things are valid, but those things happen. Pastor's care, money's given as the people actually get involved and help grow a movement within the church.
Yeah. Someone did ask about, how do you help churches make room in their budget to do more, but yeah, I see that those things are sort of the outcome of what's going on among the people.
It's hard and it takes time. I mean, again, it was our own story. I think the church I was a part of, Sojourn, is known to be a sending church, but that wasn't always true. It took 8-10 years to build that culture that really made an impact. But it really was a groundswell of people who God was just moving in, and they gathered together and built momentum over time. So if you're listening to this webinar and you feel like someone who loves missions, and maybe your leadership doesn't care or doesn't care as much as you do, or they give to other things that maybe you don't think are as valuable, just continue to pray, continue to build, and don't be afraid to meet with your leadership and share your desire.
Do you think that having try to get some interest in your church, maybe sending a group on a short-term trip, can that be helpful in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, maybe that's probably a different webinar, but making sure that you are developing good partnerships on the field, sending a way that can really help the field, all of those things. But I think that is a way to both, done well, serve the field and build interest. I think that's one of the things. I think even exposure. So one of the ministry I run is called Upstream Sending, but our partner ministry is called Upstream Collective. And what they do is write resources and books and coach churches. And a core concept of what they do is like, how do you bring global awareness to a church? From the spaces in your building where you can bring awareness, or the preaching calendar, budgeting, all that kind of stuff. All those little decisions build up into something that like creates culture within the body.
Yeah, I love that. Another question, can you suggest what kinds of groups might make good small groups for your study? Particularly thinking of women's small groups and older adults, because that's who this person is most involved with. Do you recommend more of a general group called to mission, the global mission-minded people of the church? So maybe do you want to gather folks, by age or stage, or make it more of a general mission-related group?
Yeah, I don't think it probably matters. I think the way it's written, you could teach it to, middle school and up, mixed group, or around certain segments, and it would be fine. I think that the thing that is important to know is it's intended to be customized. For example, one of the suggestions I make is like, what if you did this 9-week study and the conclusion of the study is you go and do a short-term trip together? That could be helpful. Or it could be you teach it in a women's group, and then you guys go out on a Saturday and you do a work project to apply some of the things you're learning. So I don't think it necessarily matters.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we have one last question. It's a bit cryptic, but I think you'll understand it better than I do. How does Jesus sending in John 20 relate to Genesis 3 and 12?
Yeah, good question. So I'll take a shot here. Genesis 3. So we see the fall happening, and then when the Father is talking to Adam and Eve and to Satan, he gives this promise in Genesis 3:15 that the serpent will hurt the heel of the Savior, and the Savior will crush the head. So there's this, like, the first foreshadowing of this messianic promise that there was a Savior coming. And then we get to, so there's a promise of Jesus, and then we get to Genesis 12, and God calls out Abram and his family and gives them 3 promises. The third promise is this promise that that God would bless the nations through Abraham's family, which was the nation of Israel. So that's the Walter Kaiser, he's an Old Testament professor, called that the first Great Commission passage. And then you get to Genesis 20, Jesus is calling us to sin. So there is an arc of fulfillment between and others. There's, like, you could put others throughout those, but this promise that the God the Father would send the Son as a Savior, and then that Savior is going to come through the people of God. And then you get to Genesis, or you get to John 20, and Jesus says, as the Father sent me, as promised in Genesis 3, all the way through the Old Testament, I am sending you. There's a movement of sending.
That's amazing.
So
I love
the first 2 chapters, I think, answer that question. As I go from Genesis 3 all the way to Revelation 7, the ultimate fulfillment of God's people who were sent and recipients worshiping before Jesus for all of eternity.
That's amazing. Yeah, I
Good
love that.
question. I like that. We should have more of those.
Well, I can tell you that was a Surge person. So
good. I like it.
Good deal. Well, I think we'll wrap up our Q&A now. Thank you again, Nathan, for sharing with us and just giving us kind of a taste of this book that I know will be an amazing resource to folks as they start to think and pray more about what it means for them to live in a sent way. And the good news is that you can get Nathan's book, and this is, today was only a sampling, as he said. There's many more ideas and things you can read about in there and practice and discuss with a group. You can do it classroom style in your church, or just with others, kind of an affinity group. And I think you can, expect God to use it in both individuals as well as your church communities. And what's great is that our publisher, New Growth, has provided today's webinar viewers with a discount, a promo code that will give you 30% off. You see it there on the screen. And actually that's good for all of Surge titles, so you can stock up. I think they even have free shipping at a certain price point. And so that's always helpful. And, Surge is a mission sending agency. And so we wanted to make you aware of some opportunities if you feel like you'd like to consider what it might mean for you to dip your toe into the water of cross-cultural missions. I'd encourage you to check out, for example, this short-term missions opportunity with Surge next summer. It's called Leap Week, which stands for London Evangelism and Prayer Week. It's a trip that's been happening for over 2 decades, and I know that because I went on Leap Week in 2001, and it definitely was life-changing and catalytic for me. And what you'll experience is, you'll get to see and learn about world religions and different cultures, and also participate in prayer and outreach alongside the Surge missionaries. who live and work there, predominantly in South Asian neighborhoods. So folks from different perspectives, all kind of living there together in London. And it's really an amazing opportunity. The dates for next summer are July 3 through 10. So I hope you'll consider that. You can find out more on Surge's website. There's a short-term team section under the missions tab where you can find out about Leap Week and other opportunities, as well as longer opportunities. And for those of you watching today, we wanted to make you aware of our next webinar called Grace for the Control Freak Within All of Us with McKay Caston. And I have no idea who he would be talking about, kidding. But that webinar will take place on Wednesday, October 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So be on the lookout for the email with that registration information. And that will, I'm sure, be really, really good stuff as well. So we got some questions in the Q&A about a recording of this webinar. So yes, you'll receive an email from us in the next day or two, and it will include a link to the recording of this webinar in case you want to view it again or share it with others who missed it today. We're also excited that our publisher is making it possible for us to share an excerpt of Nathan's book, You Are Sent. So you can get an idea of kind of take a deeper dive into the inside of the book, and you know, it might be something you can bring to your missions pastor or you know, or friends around you and say, hey, here's something we should look at. You'll get a link so you can order the book from our publisher, along with the reminder about the 30% off discount code. And then we'll provide you with a link to register for next month's webinar with McKay Caston. And if you want to learn more about Surge, if you're interested in the programs and resources created by our renewal team, including our full webinar archive, or you just want to learn about different missions opportunities around the world, you can find that and more at surge.org. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out to us on the renewal team. The email is grow@surge.org. You can send us your questions and comments, and we always love to hear from you. And from all of us at Surge, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Goodbye, everyone.